The woman hit the pavement running. She burst out of the black SUV before it had fully stopped, one heel snapping off as she landed, and she didn't slow down, not even to look at what she'd left behind. Her dress was expensive, the kind that didn't belong on a street like this, and her hair had come half undone from whatever it had been pinned into earlier that evening. None of that mattered. What mattered was the three men climbing out of the vehicle behind her. They weren't running. They didn't need to. Men like that always knew they'd win. It was only a matter of time. Marcus Day saw all of it in the span of about 4 seconds. He had been stopped at the light on Clearfield, Eli dozing in the back seat after a late basketball practice, the radio low. A normal Tuesday night, the kind of night he had trained himself to expect and be grateful for. Then the SUV blew through the intersection, screeched to a stop 50 yards ahead, and the woman tumbled out of it like something discarded. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Don't," said the part of him that had spent 6 years building a quiet life on top of the ruins of the old one. The woman glanced back. One of the men had broken into a jog now, straightening his jacket with one hand, calm in the way that people who've never had to fear consequences tend to be calm. She stumbled, caught herself against a parked car, kept moving. Marcus was already pulling over. He told himself it was instinct, old training, muscle memory, nothing more. He told himself it had nothing to do with the way her panic looked. In the split second, her eyes swept the street, like she already knew no one was going to help her. He told himself a lot of things as he stepped out of the car. "Stay in the car," he said through the window to Eli, low and firm. "Doors locked. You don't move." Eli sat up, blinking sleep from his eyes, and without a word reached over and hit the lock button. 8 years old and already fluent in the silences his father left behind. Marcus walked toward the men. He didn't have a badge anymore, didn't have a gun on his hip. What he had was 6 feet 2 inches of absolute stillness, and the particular expression of a man who has already decided how this ends. The lead man stopped. Marcus stopped beside the woman, close enough that she instinctively stepped behind him, and looked at the man who was holding the door to her nightmare open. "Can I help you?" he said. And then, before he could think better of it, before the reasonable part of his brain could catch up to what was already leaving his mouth, he heard himself say, "That's my fiancé, so I'm gonna need you to back the hell up." If you're new here, this is the kind of story we tell on this channel. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss where this one goes. Trust me, you'll want to see how it ends. The 3 men left, not because Marcus had scared them. Men like that didn't scare easily. They left because he had given them something more useful than a fight, a name to bring back. The fiancé has a man. That changed the paperwork. That required a phone call. The woman stood behind him until the SUV's taillights disappeared around the corner, and then she exhaled, a long, controlled breath that told him she'd been holding it for longer than just tonight. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "Don't thank me yet." Marcus turned to look at her for the first time without the immediate threat in the way. She was younger than he'd thought, late 20s maybe, with dark eyes that were already scanning the street in both directions, cataloging exits. Not panicked, calculating. "They're going to make a call. Whoever sent them is going to know about me within the hour." She met his eyes. "I know. Do you have somewhere to go?" A pause, honest and brief. "No." Marcus looked back at his car. Eli had fogged up the passenger window slightly, face pressed close to the glass, watching. The kid had the good sense not to get out, but the worry on his face was visible even from here. That particular look he got when he was trying to figure out if something was his father's problem or everyone's problem. With Marcus, it was usually both. He made a decision that he would spend the next several days questioning. "Get in the car," he said. Her name, the name she gave him, was Nora. Nora Voss. She said it like she'd said it many times in recent months, which Marcus would later understand meant she hadn't said it very many times at all. She sat in the front seat while Eli reestablished himself in the back, and she answered Marcus's questions in the clipped, measured way of someone who was choosing each word before releasing it. The men worked for her husband. His name was Raymond. She didn't offer a last name yet. They had a disagreement. She needed a few days before she could get to people who could help her. Marcus drove and listened and didn't push. He'd been a cop long enough to know when someone was giving him the outline instead of the story. He'd also been a cop long enough to know that pushing too hard too early just made people close off entirely. From the back seat, Eli said, "What happened to your shoe?" Nora glanced down. She was wearing one heel and one bare foot, which she'd apparently not noticed until this moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "It broke when I was running." "We have Band-Aids," Eli offered. "Dad always has Band-Aids." "I'll keep that in mind," she said. Marcus had bought the house on Dunmore Street 4 years ago when Eli had started asking why they kept moving. It was narrow, 2 stories, with a porch that needed repainting and a backyard that was mostly used for the basketball hoop Marcus had installed the week they moved in. It was not the kind of house a person would associate with danger. That had been the point. He gave Nora the guest room and showed her where the bathroom was, where the clean towels were kept, where the deadbolt was on the front door. "The chain, too," he said, nodding at the secondary lock. "Always the chain." She nodded, studying the door with the focused attention of someone filing away tactical information. "You were a cop," she said. It wasn't a question. "Used to be." "What happened?" He looked at her. She held his gaze without flinching. Not aggressive, just direct. The kind of directness that came from practice. "Long story," he said. "Get some sleep." He didn't sleep much himself. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and his thoughts for company, running through the evening the way he used to run through incident reports, linearly, without sentiment. The facts were, he had inserted himself into a domestic situation involving at least 3 organized individuals and an unknown husband with enough resources to send a car. He had identified himself by name. He had brought the woman to his home where his son was sleeping. He had done this before. Not this exact thing, but he had done the thing where he saw danger in someone else's orbit and stepped into it anyway, trusting that his own skill and luck and conviction were enough to hold the line. The last time, his wife had paid for it. Her name had been Diane. She'd been 31, a middle school art teacher, and completely uninvolved in any of the work Marcus had spent 3 years doing to dismantle one of the largest trafficking networks operating through the port. She had been killed on a Thursday afternoon in the parking garage of the grocery store 2 blocks from their apartment by 2 men who wanted Marcus to understand what it cost to come after them. He had understood. He had also destroyed what remained of their operation within 6 months and then handed in his badge because staying felt like tempting something he was no longer willing to tempt. He thought about Diane now. He thought about Eli upstairs, asleep, unaware. He thought about the way Nora had stepped behind him on that street, not clinging, not collapsing, just stepping behind him the way someone steps behind a wall, like she'd already assessed his structural integrity and decided he'd hold. He hoped she was right. In the morning, he found her at the kitchen table. She'd found coffee, which he appreciated, and was sitting with both hands wrapped around a mug, staring at nothing. And she looked so fundamentally exhausted that Marcus felt something in his chest do something inconvenient. "We need to talk about the situation," he said, pouring his own cup. "Yes," she agreed. He sat across from her. "Whoever your husband is, Raymond, he now knows your fiancé is a black man named Marcus Day who lives on Dunmore Street. That's not nothing. That's an address. That's a target." She didn't look away. "I know, I'm sorry." "I'm not asking for an apology, I'm telling you what we're working with." He set his mug down. "If you go back to him, last night doesn't protect you. It makes things worse. If you stay here without a real story, a real structure, he can still get to you through legal channels. A husband reporting a missing wife carries weight, regardless of why she's missing." Nora was quiet for a moment. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we make the story real enough to hold up. You have an address, this one. You have a name, mine." He paused. "For paper trails, for any background check Raymond's people might run, Having consistent names holds up better than two separate ones. So until you're out of this, you go by Nora Day. We stay consistent with what I already said last night, and we buy you enough time to get to whoever can actually help you." He paused again. "You said you had people." "I do," she said. "I just need time to reach them safely." "How much time?" Another pause. She was measuring something. Him, or herself, or the odds of some calculation he couldn't see yet. "A week," she said. "Maybe 2. Marcus nodded slowly. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't anything close to what he would have chosen if he were building this from scratch. But he hadn't built it from scratch. He'd built it in 4 seconds at a red light on Clearfield Avenue, and now he had to live inside what that had made. "All right," he said. "Then for the next 2 weeks, you're Nora Day, and we figure the rest out as we go." She looked at him across the table, really looked at him for the first time without urgency or calculation in the way, and said quietly, "Why are you doing this?" Marcus picked up his mug. "Because I already started," he said, "and I don't quit things halfway." The arrangement had rules, even if they hadn't formally written them down. Marcus made breakfast at 7. Eli left for school at 8:15. Nora stayed off her personal phone and used the prepaid he bought her at the drugstore on the corner. They didn't discuss what she did before. They didn't discuss what came next. They maintained the surface of 2 adults sharing a space without defining what the space meant. It worked mostly during the day. It was harder at the edges, mornings before Eli woke up, evenings after he went to bed, when there was no activity to hide behind, and the silence in the house had texture to it. Nora stayed in her room most of the first 2 days. Marcus didn't push. He understood the instinct to go small when you'd been living large and dangerous for too long, to pull everything inward, make yourself easy to overlook. He'd done the same thing after Diane, moved through rooms like a man trying not to leave fingerprints. On the 3rd day, Eli broke it. He knocked on the guest room door at 4 in the afternoon, holding a spiral notebook with a drawing of a dragon on the cover. "You can say no," he said when Nora opened the door, "but I wanted to show you something I drew." She looked at the notebook, then at him. Then she opened the door wider and stepped back. "Let me see." Marcus watched from the hallway, staying outside the frame of the doorway. He heard Eli explaining the drawing, a city, half underwater, half still standing, with figures moving through both halves, and heard Nora asking questions, real ones, following the logic of the world his son had built. Her voice was different with Eli than with Marcus, less managed, like she hadn't remembered yet to be careful. That evening, she stayed for dinner. She sat at the end of the table and ate the food Marcus had made. Nothing elaborate, just rice and chicken and whatever vegetables Eli would tolerate. And somewhere between the first and second course, the carefulness in her face eased enough that Marcus could see what was underneath it. Not happiness exactly, but something adjacent to rest. He noticed other things too, over the days that followed. The way she moved through the house when she thought no one was watching. Not aimlessly, but with quiet precision. Always aware of the exits, always with her back to a wall when she sat. The way she read the room before she entered it. The way she had once, when he'd stepped outside for a call, managed to understand the full shape of the situation from a partial conversation through the window, and had the details straight before he'd finished explaining when he came back in. He had been annoyed, then impressed, then unsettled by how impressed he was. He told himself she was a woman running from a dangerous man, and that his responsibility began and ended at keeping her safe. He told himself that every evening, and every evening it felt slightly less true than the one before. On the 6th day, Raymond's face appeared on the news. Marcus was in the kitchen when it happened, and he turned up the volume without thinking. The segment was brief, an anchor noting that Raymond Hale, prominent real estate developer, had filed a missing persons report for his wife, identified as Elaine Hale, last seen 6 days ago. A photo appeared on screen. It was Nora. Marcus stood with the remote in his hand and watched the segment twice before he heard her come downstairs. He didn't turn around. "Elaine," he said. "It's the name on the marriage certificate," she said. "I go by Nora. I've always gone by Nora. His name is Raymond Hale." Another pause. Longer. "Yes." Marcus set the remote on the counter. Raymond Hale. He knew the name the way anyone who'd spent 20 years working this city knew it. Not personally, but by gravity. The kind of name that made other names rearrange themselves around it. He turned around. She was standing in the kitchen doorway in one of the 2 changes of clothes she'd arrived with, watching him with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and is not surprised it has finally come. "How much of what you told me is true?" he asked. "All of it," she said. "I left out some of the context." "How much context?" She came into the kitchen and sat down at the table. Not defensively, matter-of-factly, the way someone sits when they've decided to stop spending energy on a position they can no longer maintain. "Raymond didn't just want me back," she said. "He wants what's mine. The assets, properties, holdings, a portfolio I built before we were married. The prenuptial agreement was supposed to protect them, but he had it redrafted 2 years in, and I didn't catch every change before I signed." She looked at her hands. "I've spent the last 8 months building a case. Documentation, transactions, communications, enough to invalidate the revised agreement and expose what he's been doing. Not just to me, but through me. He moves money, clean money and not clean money, through accounts that are nominally mine." Marcus was quiet. "He became violent when he realized I knew," she said. "Not immediately. Raymond doesn't do things immediately. But I understood that the window for getting out safely was closing. So I created a version of myself with less to lose and I started moving." She finally looked up at him. "The men that night were there to bring me back before I could reach the attorneys I'd arranged to meet." Marcus pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "You're not running from a bad marriage," he said. "You're running from a criminal investigation that you're the primary witness in." "Yes." "And the primary target." "Also yes." He looked at her for a long moment. "How much are we talking about?" "The assets." She told him. The number rearranged several things in Marcus's understanding of the situation. "I didn't tell you," she said, "because I needed someone who would help me because it was the right thing to do, not because of what I was worth." He understood that. He didn't like the shape it had taken, but he understood it. Meanwhile, in a glass-walled office on the 42nd floor of a building that bore his name, Raymond Hale sat at the head of a long table and spoke to 4 attorneys in the unhurried tone of a man who had never once been in a room where he held less power than anyone else. "She has a name now," he said, setting down his phone. "Marcus Day, former law enforcement, single father." He straightened one cufflink without looking at it. "I want his history, professional, personal, anything with paperwork. And I want options." He let the words settle. "Elaine is not a missing wife. She's a misplaced asset. And assets come back." No one in the room pushed back. Men who worked for Raymond Hale had learned early that the cost of pushing back was not worth what it bought. He ended the meeting with 3 words: "Find her first." The week after the truth came out was the hardest. Not because of what she'd hidden. Marcus had processed that, filed it into the category of people do what they need to do to survive and moved forward. What was harder was the space between them that the truth had opened up. The way they now moved around the house with a new awareness of what they each knew about the other and what it cost. She knew about Diane. He'd told her, not all of it, but enough, during one of the evenings that had blurred past the point where not saying it felt more dishonest than saying it. He knew about the money, about the case, about the woman she actually was when she wasn't running. Neither of them quite knew what to do with the knowing. And then Marcus found out about the meeting. He came home from picking up Eli to find Nora on the prepaid, speaking in low, rapid sentences that stopped when she heard the door. He didn't ask. She didn't offer. That evening, after Eli was in bed, he found a name in the browser history she'd used on his laptop. A law firm he recognized, one that represented the kind of clients who required discretion as a baseline. He knocked on her door. She opened it without surprise. "You reached out to them," he said. "I needed to start moving the pieces," she said. "The window is narrowing. Raymond's attorneys are building a case to frame my absence as instability. They're going to use it to accelerate the asset transfer." "You could have told me." "I didn't want to put more on you." He looked at her steadily. "Nora, you are already in my house. My son knows your name. Raymond Hale's people have a photograph of me from a street camera, and that photograph is currently being used to build a narrative that I'm the reason a billionaire's wife left him." He paused. "There is nothing about this situation that is not already mine. So when you make moves inside it without telling me, you're not protecting me. You're making it harder for me to protect us." Something shifted in her expression. Not agreement, something more complicated. The look of someone who has operated alone for so long that the concept of us requires a second to locate. "I'm not used to this," she said. "Having someone." "I know," he said. "Neither am I." Outside their walls, Raymond was accelerating. The media piece ran on a Wednesday, a carefully placed story in 2 outlets, both of which had editorial relationships with Raymond's PR firm, framing Nora's disappearance as a mental health crisis, characterizing her behavior as erratic, noting the presence of an unnamed man in connection with her whereabouts. By Thursday, an attorney had filed for a civil protective order on Raymond's behalf. Not to protect Raymond, but to establish Marcus as a destabilizing presence, feeding directly into a parallel process challenging his fitness as sole guardian of Eli. Marcus's attorney, an old colleague named Beverly who owed him a favor and was ferociously competent, called Friday morning. "They flagged the Randall case," Beverly said. The Randall case was a shooting inquiry from Marcus's last year on the force, a clean investigation that had cleared him entirely, but which had generated enough paperwork to make a story out of if you arranged the documents in the right order. "It's not going anywhere, but it doesn't have to. It just has to make a judge nervous." Marcus listened to this with his hand braced on the kitchen counter and his eyes on the backyard, where Eli was shooting free throws in the early morning quiet. "How long to push back?" he asked. "Weeks, if we're lucky. Longrens if they keep feeding documents." After he hung up, he stood there watching Eli. The kid had his father's form, feet squared, elbow in, follow-through clean, and his mother's stubbornness, which meant he would shoot the same shot 40 times in a row until it felt right. He was shooting it now, missing mostly, shooting again. Marcus didn't tell him about the custody filing. He wouldn't, not yet, but he felt it in his chest. The specific weight of knowing that his choices were beginning to press against the only thing he had refused ever to put at risk. Turning point 2. The call came on a Monday. Marcus was at the hardware store when his phone rang. An unknown number which he almost didn't answer, and then did because something in his chest told him to. There was background noise on the line. A hallway, maybe. An institutional kind of quiet. Then a small voice said, "Dad?" Marcus was already walking toward the exit. Eli had been held after school, the man on the other end explained. Not a teacher, not a school administrator, someone else entirely. Someone with a voice that stayed pleasant in the specific way of people delivering messages rather than having conversations. He was fine. He was sitting in a car outside the school. He would remain fine, the voice implied, as long as Marcus understood the parameters of his current situation. "If you touch him," Marcus said. "He's 8, the voice said. "No one is touching anyone. Consider this a conversation." The line went dead. Marcus was in his car by then. He called Beverly on the way and told her to meet him at the school. Told her to bring Eli back to her office and keep him there until Marcus called. Beverly, who had known Marcus long enough to understand when explanations would have to wait, simply said, "I'll be there in 10 minutes." He drove to the school in 11, running 2 lights, and found Eli sitting on the front steps with his backpack and his basketball, and the particular expression of a child who has been frightened and then decided out of loyalty to his father to appear not frightened. 2 men in a gray car across the street watched Marcus speak briefly with Beverly, watched him crouch down to say something in Eli's ear, watched the boy nod once with his jaw set, his father's jaw, his father's expression, and then leave with Beverly without looking back at the gray car. The men across the street drove away. They had delivered their message. That was all they'd come to do. Marcus drove home alone, one hand on the wheel, the other pressed flat on the passenger seat where his son usually sat. When he got home, Nora was in the kitchen. She took one look at his face and set down what she was holding. Marcus stood in the doorway and said, "He went after Eli." His voice was level. That was the only thing he could control right now. Nora held his gaze, and he watched something move through her. Not surprised, because she had always known Raymond was capable of this, but something rawer. The specific guilt of a person who has brought a war to a place where it was never supposed to reach. "Marcus, I need a minute," he said. He went to the back door and stood on the porch in the cold. He thought about Diane in the parking garage. He thought about Eli's hand in his all these years, the weight of being the only thing standing between his son and the kind of world that had taken everything else. He thought about what it meant that Raymond Hale had found that specific pressure point within 3 weeks, which meant someone had been watching for longer than that. He came back inside. Nora was standing where he'd left her, which he appreciated. She hadn't filled the silence with anything. "Tell me you have enough," he said. "The evidence. Tell me what you have is enough to end this. If I can get it to the right people in the right order before Raymond can move the accounts..." "Yes," she said. "It's enough to take everything from him. The assets, the partners, the legal standing." She paused. "But I can't do it from the side. I have to go public. All of it. My identity, my financials, the documentation. Once I step into the light, I can't step back out." He nodded slowly. "And if you do that," he said, "Raymond loses control of the narrative. No more missing wife. No more pressure on the custody filing. No more anything," she said. "It burns the whole architecture down." She looked at him steadily. "But Marcus, I can't make that call for you. If I come out of the shadow, your name comes with it. Everything we said, everything we've been here, it becomes public. And you didn't sign up for that." He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about how she had stepped behind him on a street in the dark and trusted him to hold, and about how she had spent the weeks since learning, slowly and with visible difficulty, that holding could go both ways. "You're not doing this alone," he said. She blinked, just once. "We do it together," Marcus said, "or we don't do it at all." They worked through the night before it all went public. Beverly joined them by phone, pulling in a colleague who specialized in corporate governance. Nora's proxy attorney, the one she'd contacted through the law firm Marcus had found in the browser history, drove in from out of state and arrived at 2 in the morning with a hard copy of the documentation that Nora reviewed page by page at the kitchen table, while Marcus kept watch at the window and refreshed both their coffees without being asked. The plan was not complicated. The best plans rarely were. Nora would surface, not quietly, not through back channels, publicly, with her name and her face and the full weight of what she actually was. A statement, released simultaneously to 3 journalists she trusted, which preempted Raymond's narrative and established hers before he could respond. The statement would include enough of the documentation to be immediately credible: the redrafted prenuptial clause, 2 of the shell company transactions, and the name of the corporate entity Raymond had used to begin the asset transfer. By the time Raymond's PR team was awake and responding, she would already be in the building. Marcus's job was Raymond's attention. They finalized the details at 4 in the morning. Nora's attorney left at 5. Beverly stayed on standby by phone. Marcus and Nora sat across from each other at the kitchen table in the quiet that follows a decision that cannot be unmade. And for a while, neither of them said anything. "Get some sleep," Marcus said eventually. 2 hours, you'll need it." She looked at him. "Will you?" "I'll be fine." She stood up, paused beside the table. "Marcus," she stopped, started again. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that you are the first person in a very long time who made me feel like I wasn't managing a situation alone." She said it plainly, the way she said all true things. Then she went upstairs. Marcus sat at the table until the sky outside the window started going gray. The story broke the next morning, a Tuesday, on their terms, not Raymond's. The statement ran in 3 outlets simultaneously at 6:15 a.m. By 7, it had been picked up by 12 more. By 7:30, the parking situation outside had changed. The media vans that had been drifting toward the story Raymond was building now had a different story to point at entirely. Beverly called Marcus at 7:30. "The custody motion," she said. "They're going to feel this. Raymond's legal team is going to be in damage control within the hour, and that means the resources propping up the custody filing are about to get redirected." "How long until we know?" "End of day," she said. "Maybe sooner." Marcus told her where Eli was, still at her office from the night before, where Beverly's paralegal had set him up with a conference room, a stack of granola bars, and what had apparently become a very involved conversation about basketball statistics. He asked Beverly to keep him there through the morning. She agreed without hesitation. Then Marcus drove to Raymond's building. He had been in the lobby for 11 minutes when Raymond's assistant appeared and said that Mr. Hale had been called into an emergency matter and would need to reschedule. Marcus looked at the assistant with the particular quiet he'd spent 20 years on the force learning to inhabit and said pleasantly, "I'll wait." He waited 40 minutes. He didn't mind the 40 minutes. While he sat, Raymond was upstairs in a sequence of rapid, escalating phone calls that Marcus could reconstruct later from the timeline. First learning that Nora had gone public, then learning the statement was already running in 2 outlets, then 3, then learning that his PR team had been unable to contain it, then learning that his wife, his majority shareholder wife, the woman the narrative had cast as unstable and missing, had walked into the Hale Holdings building on the other side of the city and was currently sitting in the boardroom with documentation, an attorney, and 12 people who were legally obligated to listen to her. Marcus's phone buzzed at 9:47. "Beverly." "She's in. Board is convening." He stood up, nodded pleasantly to the assistant, and walked out into the morning. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Nora laid it out the way she'd laid it out to Marcus at the kitchen table. Not the outline, not the compressed version, but all of it. The prenuptial redraft, the clauses she'd caught too late, the shell companies Raymond had been routing money through using her name and signature, the 8 months of documentation built through a proxy attorney in another state, transaction records, email chains, and the recorded conversation, legal in the jurisdiction where it had been captured, in which Raymond had explicitly discussed the correction, the moment he would move the assets fully into his own name and remove the obstacle that Nora represented. She had the recording on a drive. She had everything on a drive. The board, faced with documentation that made Raymond's exposure their exposure, moved fast. Corporate boards always moved fast when the liability became personal. 2 members requested independent counsel within the first hour. By the 3rd hour, Raymond's appointed representatives on the board had stopped arguing the substance and started arguing procedure, which meant they'd already conceded the substance. By the 4th hour, it was over. Not completely. The legal process would take months, federal investigators would take longer, and Raymond Hale would spend considerable money making everything as slow and painful as possible on his way down. But the architecture was broken. The asset transfer was frozen pending review. The narrative he'd spent 3 weeks building collapsed under the weight of the one she'd spent 8 months constructing. From his side of the city, Marcus had spent the morning at Beverly's office, working through the custody filing in real time. The withdrawals came in the afternoon. First, the civil protective order. Vacated at 3:15, Raymond's legal team citing a change in circumstances with the particular terseness of people who wanted this document to disappear. Then the custody motion, formally withdrawn at 4, the underlying support structure gone now that Raymond's resources were occupied with something considerably larger than one former cop's parental fitness. Beverly set down her phone and looked at Marcus across her desk. "It's done," she said. "Eli's yours. He was always yours, but now there's nothing left to challenge it." Marcus nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he went down the hall to the conference room, knocked once, and opened the door. Eli was at the table with 3 granola bar wrappers, an empty soda can, and a basketball balanced on one knee. He looked up. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, kid." Marcus leaned against the doorframe. "Ready to go home?" Eli considered this with the gravity he applied to most things. "Is Nora going to be there?" "She will be," Marcus said. Eli stood up and grabbed his bag. "Okay then," he said, as if that settled every remaining question. Which, Marcus supposed, it did. Nora came back to Dunmore Street that night. She didn't have to. She had resources now, options, the full architecture of her actual life available to her in a way it hadn't been for months. She could have gone anywhere. She came back to the narrow house with the porch that needed repainting at 8:30 in the evening, carrying takeout from the Thai place on Henderson that Eli had mentioned once in passing, and knocked on the door like a person who was asking permission rather than assuming it. Marcus opened it and looked at her for a moment. "You remembered the order," he said. "Eli told me his. Yours, I guessed." She held up the bag. "Spicy?" "Always." He stepped back and let her in. They ate at the kitchen table. The 3 of them, the same configuration they'd found their way to weeks ago without planning it, and Eli talked through most of the meal, processing the day in the way he processed most things. Out loud, in detail, with occasional digressions that had no clear relation to the main story, but that Marcus had learned to follow anyway. Nora listened to him, fully, not the polite, partial attention of someone waiting for their turn, but the real kind that asked follow-up questions in the right places and remembered details from earlier conversations, and treated his 8-year-old concerns with the same seriousness she had applied to the boardroom that morning. Marcus watched her do this and felt something in him loosen. Not dramatically, not in the way that things shifted in the heat of crisis. In the small way that real things shift. Quietly when you're not looking directly at it, the way your eyes adjust to a room getting lighter. After dinner, Eli went upstairs. He said goodnight to both of them in the same breath, without ceremony, the way people say goodnight to members of their household. The kitchen was quiet. Nora stood at the sink rinsing dishes, and Marcus leaned against the counter beside her, and neither of them felt the pressure to fill the silence the way they had in the early days. The silence had changed shape. It was a different kind now. "What happens next?" Marcus asked. "For Raymond, federal process. It'll take time, but the documentation is comprehensive. His partners are already cooperating." She set a glass in the drying rack. "For me, I have a company to reclaim. A lot of decisions I've been deferring." She paused. "It's going to be complicated for a while." "Complicated doesn't scare me." She glanced sideways at him. "I know. That's one of the things." She stopped, started again. "I'm not used to that. People who aren't scared of complicated things. In my experience, people stay when it's simple and leave when it isn't." "Then you've known the wrong people." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know how to do this," she said. Not as a confession of weakness, as a fact, stated plainly, by a woman who had spent 8 months being precise about facts. "Whatever this is." "Neither do I," Marcus said. "I haven't done this since Diane." She turned to face him. "Does that scare you?" He thought about the question honestly, the way she deserved to have it thought about. "Yeah," he said. "Some. But I've been scared before. I know how to work through scared." She looked at him the way she'd looked at him that first night, when she'd stepped behind him on a dark street and made a split-second assessment and decided he'd hold. Except this time, the calculation was different. This time she wasn't evaluating structural integrity. She was evaluating something harder to measure and more worth measuring. "Okay," she said quietly. Just that. Just okay. As if something had been proposed and she had considered it and chosen it. Which, Marcus supposed, was exactly what had happened. He found her the next morning at the kitchen table, both hands around a mug, watching the backyard through the window. Eli was already out there, up early, shooting free throws in the gray morning light, the same shot over and over, missing and adjusting and trying again. She hadn't heard Marcus come downstairs. He stood in the doorway for a moment watching her watch his son. She had her knees pulled up, her hair still undone from sleep, and she looked nothing like a woman who had walked into a boardroom yesterday and dismantled a man's entire financial architecture in 4 hours. She looked like someone who had finally found a place quiet enough to just be. He went to the coffee maker and poured 2 cups. When he set hers in front of her, she looked up. He sat across from her. Outside, Eli made the shot, a clean follow-through, net barely moving, and turned around with his arms out as if waiting for the world to acknowledge it. Nora laughed, a real one, quick and unguarded, the kind that escaped before you decided to allow it. Marcus watched her and thought, this, not the crisis, not the fight, not the careful architecture of cover stories and contingency plans. This, a kitchen, a table, a kid making free throws in the yard, and a woman laughing at something small and real. Eli's going to want you to see the new drawing, he said. She wrapped both hands around her cup and smiled. I know, she said. I already told him I would. Outside, Eli was lining up the shot again. The morning was getting lighter. There's something worth sitting with at the end of a story like this. Marcus didn't step in that night because he knew who she was. He didn't know anything. Not her name, not her money, not what she was carrying. He stepped in because he looked at a woman running scared and decided that wasn't something he could drive past. That's it. That was the whole thing. And Nora, a woman who had every resource in the world except one, found the one thing money genuinely cannot manufacture. Someone who stood in front of the danger before they knew there was anything in it for them. Sometimes the family you end up with is nothing like the one you planned. Sometimes it starts with a split-second decision at a red light, a broken heel, a kid who just wants to show someone his drawing. Sometimes the walls come down not because you decided to trust, but because someone kept showing up until trusting felt less dangerous than not. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about someone in your life who showed up when it cost them something, share it with them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. We tell stories like this one every week, stories about people who chose the harder, better thing. We'd love to have you here for the next one.